Let's see. I'm up here. I'm up there. Fantastic. Thank you. All right. If somebody would let people enjoying refreshments know that we're going to get rolling, they can join us. Kids can join us. Definitely teens for sure. They can join us because I'm going to be talking about their favorite topic, which is Hanukkah. Show me kids that don't like Hanukkah. I mean, I promise it's not all fun and dreidels. We're going to talk about some serious stuff too. We're going to study Torah a little bit today, if you don't mind. This is a synagogue after all. We do these kinds of things. We study Torah. But I wanted to talk to you about specifically the item that is always out there. Obviously, God's light, menorah, right? The divine light is what we're all about during Hanukkah. We celebrate freedom, victories. We celebrate God's miracles, right? And miracle of light is just one of those miracles. There's multiple miracles. Miracle of light is definitely out there. And so the festival has been called a festival of light for quite a while. Does anyone remember? I taught you guys what the first time Hanukkah is actually called Festival of Lights, when that happened. The hint is, no, it was not Adam Sandler's song. When did Hanukkah was first officially, historically called a festival of lights? Anybody remember?
I don't know, but is it because the fire was burning for 8 days?
Yes, that's obvious. But when was it called? People call it Hanukkah, right? What does Hanukkah mean? Dedication, right? So there's many ways to spell Hanukkah. You spell it with a CH, you spell it with an H, you spell it with a 2 Ks, you spell it with a 2 Ns. Whichever way you spell it doesn't really matter in English because in Hebrew it says what it says. What English letters we choose to represent those Hebrew letters is kind of subjective.
Anybody wanted to preview what Hebrew school's like every week? That was a good example.
That was a good example, yeah. So he's like, I have no idea what the answer is, but I'm going to say something anyway. Let's talk about something else. Yeah, so that's normal. That's what we do. It is a lot of fun. So I'm glad that you guys do want to talk about the Hanukkah right now. So, divine light. At the center of Hanukkah celebrations is this unusual lamp. Always is. It's a vessel of light. It's this unusual looking candelabra. It's a little bit different for everyone, obviously. I've seen so many different varieties of them. Hanukkah is called the Festival of Lights in honor of the miracle that occurred with this holy lamp in the temple. So there was one in the temple. And though short on oil, the lamp burned miraculously for much longer than it should have, for 8 days in fact. So we light the Hanukkiahs, these lamps that look like the temple menorah, but with 2 extra branches. So that's really what it's about. A quick explanation about Hanukkiahs and menorahs. I know that in America it's very common to say menorah, and a lot of times we say Hanukkah menorah, which a lot of people in other parts of the world would laugh at because they know that menorah is menorah and Hanukkiah is Hanukkiah. They're 2 different things. Okay, so but we in America are unique and different, so we call it Hanukkah menorah. So when people say menorah, they mean 7 lights. When they say Hanukkiah, they mean 9. And those are 2 different things, essentially. But in America, they're kind of mixed up all together into one. So if you hear somebody say Hanukkah menorah or a menorah we use for Hanukkah, we do mean Hanukkiah. Okay, so keep that in mind. That's just an American tradition, and it will not likely to change because it's been going on for a long time. And so people, once something gets going, whether it's correct or incorrect, it doesn't matter. It will just keep on going. So call them Hanukkah menorahs if you must, but technically they call Hanukkiah. So if I say Hanukkiah, you know exactly what I mean. If I say menorah, you know I'm talking about the Hanukkah menorah right now. Although usually when I say menorah, I really mean the 7 light lamp that was burning in the temple in the ancient days. So as I mentioned, most of the Hanukkiahs do kind of sort of look like the temple menorah. Maybe, maybe not. It really depends because that's not always the case. Our Hanukkah lamps, whether today they are oil-filled or they have candles, or their LED. This is the new latest thing. Okay, they all reflect and commemorate the temple menorah. That's really what it's about. They're all supposed to emulate that. They're all supposed to represent that. And the significance of the lamp is that it's represented the divine light in the midst of Israel. That really is all it's about. The point of the temple light, the menorah, in a few simple phrases, is the presence of God, His light. Some Hanukkiahs try to resemble the ancient temple lampstand, others do not, but they're all designed to carry the light. That's what's important. So as you look at the Hanukkiahs and you say, whoa, it's such a variety of designs and looks. And I've seen ones shaped like baseball bats and everything under the sun. Some made out of clay and some made out of Play-Doh, wood, metal. I've seen all kinds of Hanukkiahs made out of pretty much every material you can imagine. 3D printed ones, I mean, all kinds of stuff. But the point is that they all have to have lights. And that's what is the main feature of the menorah. There has to be a light that goes there. So, but what did the temple menorah really look like? What did it resemble? We assume that we know exactly what it looked like. Torah describes it. We read it in the Torah as golden hammered lampstand with floral tree-like motifs. That's, if you read in the Torah, that's what it's going to say. However, according to Jewish tradition, I don't know if you know this or not, but Moses had a lot of trouble understanding what Hashem had in mind when it came to making a menorah for the Mishkan. When God gave commandments to Moses about making all these different things to place into the holy dwelling place of God, the one that he had trouble with is the menorah. So here's a little passage from tradition. This is Talmud Bavli. This is Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Menachot. Rav Levi says, a pure menorah came down from heaven. How is this? For the Holy One, blessed be He, said to Moses, and you will make a menorah of pure gold. He quotes Exodus 25 there. Moses said to him, how shall we make it? God said to him, of beaten work shall the menorah be made. Nevertheless, Moses still found difficulty with it. And when he came down, he forgot its construction. So the Midrash says, basically, that Moses was shown God told him exactly how to make the menorah, but when he came down the mountain, the instructions just left him. He could not figure it out. You know, he needed a better plan. He needed to go deeper. So he went up the mountain and he said, Master of the universe, I've forgotten how to make it. And God said to him, look, and he made it. He made it out of fire and showed it to him, its construction. Still, Moses found the construction difficult. So God literally made a menorah out of fire for Moshe, out there on the mountain. He said, this is what I want. And yet, Moshe still struggled with it. So the Holy One, blessed be He, said to him, go to Bezalel, and he will make it. He went down and told Bezalel, who immediately did it. See, sometimes it just takes somebody else. Moses began to wonder, saying, to me was shown many times by the Holy One, blessed be He, yet I found it hard to make it, and you who did not see it, constructed it with your own intelligence. Bezalel, perhaps you were standing in the shadow of God when the Holy One, blessed be He, showed me its construction. So the pun here is the word Bezalel, his name, literally means in the shadow of God. The artisan in the Torah who's been charged to make all the items in the Mishkan, his name is Bezalel, which means in God's shadow. So Moshe says, maybe you were standing in God's shadow and listening to the instructions. That's why you had no trouble making it when I have had to be told and shown multiple times how to make this menorah, and I couldn't figure out how to pass on the instructions to you. So it's an amazing story, but sometimes it shows you that people of great vision who speak to Hashem face to face can't do such a simple thing as put together such an item. So we just had a menorah given to us, and I tried to put it together, and I couldn't. But Yosef put it together in no time. So there you go. That just the story repeats itself, right? The story repeats itself. I couldn't figure out. I tried it. Rachel tried it. Other people tried to help. Yosef came up and he fixed it. So thank you, Yosef. Appreciate it. So there you go. Bezalel made it. Why did Moshe have so much trouble with it? You know, I always wondered. You know, but that's what the tradition says. He just could not get his mind around it. And if you read the passages in the Torah about how the menorah was to be shaped and how it was supposed to be, maybe you will see the fact that, in fact, yes, Moshe really had a hard time describing it. It's not so simple. So why did he find this task of making the menorah so difficult? Well, the descriptions in the Torah have a lot of room for interpretation. And that's what I want you to see. So let's read through those, just for fun. Exodus 25. Let's see, verse 31 begins. Then you shall make a lampstand of pure gold. The lampstand and its base and its shaft are to be made of hammered work. Its cups, its bulbs, and its flowers shall be of one piece with it. So there's some interesting details here. 6 branches shall go out from its sides, 3 branches of the lampstand from one side, and 3 branches of the lampstand from its other side. 3 cups shall be shaped like almond blossoms on one branch, and a bulb and a flower, and 3 cups shaped like almond blossoms on the other branch, a bulb and a flower, the same for 6 branches going out from the lampstand. And on the lampstand 4 cups shaped like almond blossoms, its bulbs and its flowers. So this is the description of the menorah. If it makes sense to you in English, good. When you read this in Hebrew, it's a bit more confusing. But one thing we could be pretty sure about, we're given some very specific instructions, and there are cups and bulbs and things like that. The lamp stand for divine light is supposed to be made of gold. It's supposed to have a base. That's what we read in that passage. It's supposed to have a shaft. It's supposed to have 6 branches. And then it talks about cups and bulbs and flower designs that are worked into its design, but it's all one piece. So figure that out, how you're supposed to take and hammer out of a solid piece of gold this intricate item with 6 branches and flowers decorating it. So it's really amazing that Torah uses the almond tree and the almond blossoms in particular to describe the design of menorah. So in case you have never seen an almond tree blossom, I provided and supplied a picture for you. So hopefully you could see what it looks like. It's a lot like cherry blossoms. Those are much more common. But an almond tree, Ashkadia, I mean, it grows all over Israel. They blossom right around February, and it's beautiful. But you can see how the almonds themselves, they're like the little bulbs that start opening up, and out of that pops out flowers. So whatever the menorah was supposed to be, somehow this is the visual inspiration for its branches, and this is the visual inspiration for its cups and the way they're supposed to be shaped in that almond blossom-like shape. And there's been a lot of artists since then have tried to make a representation of menorah. Unfortunately, we don't have the menorah that Moshe made, so otherwise we could have took a snapshot of it, or a sketch or something, and we would have had it, but we haven't seen it. Unfortunately, the temple has been robbed and destroyed a number of times, and I'm sure people who have come across a beautiful piece of art like that made out of a solid talent of gold probably took it for themselves. Some people think it's in the basement of the Vatican. Yeah, there you go. Maybe that's where it is.
No, the Temple Institute got it.
The Temple Institute got it. There you go. See, I have this interesting hunch, that throughout all these things, priests made more. They didn't have just one menorah. They probably had multiples, and they had some stashed away somewhere. So maybe one of these days, some rock cave will open up, and before you know, they'll pull out a menorah from it.
And to that point, in Israel, because we had the relief on the Archititus of them taking away that menorah, which had a firm base, but when you dig down under the old city, there are replicas carved into rock, and it had a 3-pronged base.
Yes.
So that would, people say, which is it? Maybe it's both.
Yeah, so, priests were pretty shrewd, and they knew that the temple was going to be robbed sooner or later. So I know that they've made replicas and made copies and made sure that whenever somebody steals something, we can go back to worshiping Hashem because we have a backup plan. like I said, setbacks, we think through these things.
Well, it's been recently reported that many of the artifacts from the temple are still present. You mentioned in the basement of the Vatican, it very well could be. But it is in Italy. There are artifacts from the temple in Italy, and the government of Israel is in negotiations or conversations with the Italian government to bring those back to Israel. So
that would be amazing if God does this in our time.
Amazing.
It would be absolutely. Yeah. So, we'll see. We will see. It's exciting to think about these things, but we do know where they ended up. So we'll talk about that in a minute as well. We will definitely talk. History is important, and knowing history and understanding how things went. Shlomo's temple, we know where it ended up. It ended up in Babylon, right? Because we actually have records of those items being there. We have the Belshazzar's feast, where he decides to bring out the vessels and feast from them. So we know where that went. But some are still maybe out there somewhere hidden away in some places that we don't know about. But I think of the menorah, and I try to visualize what I'm reading, and it's not so easy. I don't know about you, but as I'm reading the words, I am not like Bezalel, who just poof and made it. No, I am trying to visualize, what is it supposed to be? And I'm struggling with it, I guess, like Moshe. So here's the continuation. It's not all of it. There's the rest. This is the rest. Verse 35 and forward in Exodus 25. A bulb shall be under the first pair of branches coming out of it, and a bulb under the second pair of branches coming out of it, and a bulb under the third pair of branches coming out of it, for 6 branches coming out of the lampstand. So there's supposed to be these almond bulbs, basically, out of which the branches are coming out. Then it says in verse 36, their bulbs and their branches shall be of one piece with it, and it shall be one piece of hammered work of pure gold. Now that's a difficult one to make. If you understand anything about manufacturing and working with metal, you're talking about taking one solid piece of gold and making that out of that. That's hard. So it says, then you shall make its lamps 7 in number, and they shall mount its lamps on as to shed light on the space in front of it. Its tongues and trays shall be of pure gold. It shall be made from a talent of pure gold. With all these utensils, see that you make them by the pattern for them which was shown to you on the mountain. So there you go. Moshe was shown the pattern. He forgot the plans on the way down. Now you know why Midrash tells you these stories, because we actually have a report very clear from the Torah. Moshe was given patterns. He was given very clear instructions of how to build the Mishkan, how to construct all these things, which is why they are the way they are. But reading this description, again, we get bits and pieces of it. But I guess it took a true artist to make it actually happen. And I guess some interpretation is in order. But that's why God imbues people like Bezalel with his Spirit. It says that his Spirit is going to dwell upon people like that, who will be moved by God, and they will make things that are proper and right. So that's the story of the menorah in the Torah. As I said, there's a few gaps in this record, and there are some words that are given to interpretation, but we get the idea of the floral motif. We get the idea of the connection to the almond tree and the blossoms and flowers and trees and things like that. So that becomes a reality. So more instructions does not mean they provide greater clarity, but we try to make do. So the lamp was to be elaborate, it's supposed to be floral, tree-like almost, but made out of gold. So here's a good interpretation for you. Another artist decided to say, okay, this is what I'm seeing when I'm reading Torah, right? So as many artists there are that many interpretations of what the menorah looks like. You've seen them. People make them today. Some of them look actually like that. You're like, yeah, of course it's a Hanukkiah, but that's the idea. It has that branches, flowers, the floral motif, and then these instructions. You assume that you know that they're right. Because historically, throughout history, people have depicted menorah in a variety of different ways. So here's a question. What's the right design? You've seen menorahs that look like this, with the straight branches coming out from each side. So some Hanukkiahs look like that. And then you've seen Hanukkiahs that look like that. And sometimes you'll have people argue with you. No, the Hanukkiah needs to have straight branches. That's how it is. Now, I actually have seen some plants that grow straight out like that. And then there's others that more like this, curving towards the light. So which one do you think is right? All of the above. The one in the middle. Okay, that's Daniel's answer. The one in the middle, yeah. Good answer, good answer. Obviously, that's a trick question. We don't really know which one is right because, like I said, we don't have the sketch from the Holy Temple. We don't have that. We're guessing. These are yet more artistic interpretations of what it might have looked like. But we have some pretty good ideas. And the reason we have good ideas, ladies and gentlemen, is because history is filled with people who have given us these ideas, these hints of what menorah might have looked like. So I don't know if you ever wondered about this one with the straight branches that look like the 45 degree. Like, where did that come about? How did that come to be? Thank you, exactly. Here's a manuscript by Rambam. So 12th century scholar, Moses Maimonides, or as we know him as Rambam, in his handwritten manuscript of the Mishnah commentary, he drew a menorah. Now, something you need to know about Rambam, he was not really a great artist. And he admitted it, by the way. And if you noticed, he drew it and it actually overlapped with his own little writing. I mean, he drew it off of the designated space. He's not a great artist, but he tried.
He was a rabbi, he was a doctor. What do you want from him?
Yeah, what do you want? You want him to be an artist too? So he did a service to us, and in his commentary, he depicted the menorah this way. And so, basically, in his drawing, the temple menorah has these branches that were drawn straight in this, angle that's not curved, right? And so when his son was writing a commentary following on his father's footsteps, he actually explained that is exactly how his father visualized it, with the branches reaching straight at 45-degree angle, kind of. That was the idea. So that's why you will have these menorahs that look like that. And so people that have made the Rambam menorah very, very common is Chabad. That particular movement just kind of went with it, and so a lot of times you see menorah lightings in the public squares in the cities. Like, so for example, you go right here to the city of Alpharetta, and it's going to be Chabad lighting it, and it's going to have those branches that go straight out like that. That's what they're going to look like, or kind of, sort of, but it will have those angles. And so we have actually Rambam to thank for that. That's why those menorahs exist. Like I said, there's room for interpretation in the Torah. There's nothing wrong with that. So here's another example. This is a 5th century CE depiction of the menorah in the Samaritan synagogue. Okay? Samaritan synagogue, El Kirbe, is actually the ruins of the synagogue. The synagogue does not exist today. Just a little bit of ruins exist at the foot of Mount Gerizim. So right there in Shomron, in the valley not too far from Jacob's Well, is the ruins of this El Kirbe synagogue. And Samaritans had synagogues, and they had them decorated. And this also features a floral motif, and it has these branches that are kind of, you can see curving, but you could see little pomegranates or blossoms right there, worked right into it. So it's a mosaic, and actually has a bunch of Greek writing around it too, because it's a 5th century synagogue, and at that point, Byzantine era Greek was the language. That was the language of that area. So even Samaritans spoke Greek, by the way, at that time. So we have some ideas, some historical ideas. Synagogues are depicting menorahs all throughout. So that's 5th century. But we got to go older, right? We have to. I mean, it's just there are older examples out there. So let's see this one. You recognize this one, right?
Yes.
So this is the famous Arch of Titus, which is in Rome, and it's on the side of the arch. It's on the interior of the arch. Right there is a panel depicting the treasures of the temple being carried away. Okay, and so it's a very famous relief work that has been depicted in a lot of places. You can see the standards that they're carrying. You can see them carrying the trumpets, and you see the menorah. And that menorah has a really big, huge base right there. So no way of knowing if that's just an artist rendition or if that's how it really was. But you could see the branches are rounded, right? So when is the Arch of Titus dated? First century. So there you go. So we have a first century depiction of a menorah that kind of gives us an idea of what it looked like. But since the Romans did it, can we trust their artistry to be correct? Maybe, maybe not. We don't know.
Since it was sitting right by them.
Sitting right by them, yeah. But you never know. People can mess things up pretty bad sometimes.
Before they took it back to the Vatican.
Before they took it back. So I wonder if those trumpets are sitting somewhere too, right there. Lean up against it. So the Arch of Titus gives us a pretty good clue. I'm glad you recognize it. It's definitely an iconic picture. You'll see this in so many places. Let's see if you recognize this one. Does anyone know what this is? What is this rock that you're looking at?
It looks like a sarcophagus to me, or something like that.
Okay. Sarcophagus of some sort. But do you see the image on it?
Yes.
Okay, right in the center is the menorah. It has a stand, and it has two jars right next to it.
Right.
Guess what's in the jars? Oil, probably for the menorah. That makes sense. So anybody knows where this is from and what is this? Or is this an image unfamiliar to you? It's not as familiar as the Arch of Titus to most people because this was discovered in 2009. So it's a fairly recent archaeological discovery. But if you have been to Israel recently, and specifically toward the Galilee, that is becoming one of the stops to visit. The town of Migdal, or Magdala, as it was called back then, was excavated. And as they excavated that town, they found a synagogue. And inside the synagogue, they found this pedestal it's a four-sided carved pedestal with beautiful carvings all around it, and on the front of it was the menorah. Scientists still do not know what was exactly the purpose of that table. They assume that maybe that was the bema upon which the Torah was actually placed and read at the synagogue, but that was a stone, clearly very prominent, very decorative, that was found in the Migdal, in that synagogue of Magdala. Right now, that site has been developed into a beautiful museum. The state of Israel has very strategically decided to give that site over to the Catholic Church and allow them to pour millions and millions of dollars into developing that site, because if you can imagine, Mary Magdalene is kind of important to them. She's a saint. Okay? So if they care about her, they're going to make that place really nice. And state of Israel has a lot of fantastic discoveries. And you cannot, they don't just have enough billions of dollars to build a park around every one of them. But Catholics, they have, it's right on the shore of a sea. They developed this beautiful, nice complex. They built a museum. They're preserving all the things, and now the tours are coming through, and so it's right there. So it's becoming a place of pilgrimage for a lot of people, but for us, it's a beautiful representation, and it's a relic of a first century synagogue. What I want you to realize, there's not a lot of first century synagogues found in Galilee. In fact, there's one right there in Migdal, and there's another one closer to the top of Mount Arbel. And there's maybe a couple more first century synagogues, and the rest of the synagogues you will encounter in Israel, the ruins of the synagogues you will find, they'll be from later centuries. So this is actually one of the earliest ruins of the earliest synagogues that we have. And it's in that town of Migdal. The Capernaum synagogue that we have, the big white stone synagogue, is built on top of another synagogue which used to be there. But all of the original synagogue that used to be there has been basically redone by the stones from the 5th century and on. And so, unfortunately, we don't have first century synagogue of Capernaum. We know where it used to be, but we don't have it. This one is more intact, so essentially as a spot, as a place, it's still there. So we don't have a lot of first century synagogues. The one on top of Masada is a first century synagogue, but it's really a handful of them only.
They found the mikveh very close to
They found a mikvah. That's right. Thank you, Brad. They found a mikvah right next to it. So it's easy to identify synagogues, because they have these kinds of things. So now you know. This is another stone, and this from first century. So you know what they knew, what the menorah, how they thought the menorah looked like, essentially. So we're getting more and more historical clues, right? So you're kind of figuring this out of what menorah really looked like. So, when I asked you that question, which one is the right shape, right? It was a trick question, but not so much of a trick question, because guess what? If you're a historian, you are going to figure this out. So here's one. Look at this image. The earliest known depiction of menorah is found on a coin of the Hasmonean, whose name is Marasias Antigonus, year 39 BCE. He minted a small bronze coin called pruta in Hebrew, or lepton in Greek, with 7 curved branches which are arching up from the sides of the central trunk. So this is a depiction from 39 BCE, about as close to the Maccabees as you can get. In fact, it's printed, it's minted by the Maccabees themselves, essentially. So this is a verifiable, historical, earliest depiction of the menorah that we actually have. So now if you want to answer the question, which one is the right looking one, historically you kind of have some clues right there. It still could be both, because
Picture of what existed at that time.
right.
Whereas the one in the time of Moshe could have
Right,
something different.
right. We don't. This is the key. Remember what I said. The key important part. We don't know what Shlomo's menorah looked like because it didn't survive. We have reports and images and drawings and now even minted coins with menorah on it, but they all are from later era. But this is about as early we can go into antiquity. Prior to that, we don't have any other images. And when you read the passages in the Torah, there's some room for interpretation there. So who knows what it actually looked like?
I think this pretty much confirms that one of that time was somewhat different.
Right. So when it comes to first century, when it comes to the time of the Maccabees, we're pretty certain that's what it looked like back then. So when you go into the Old City in Jerusalem and you see that big, huge golden menorah the size of me in a square, it's protected by very thick glass, because I'm sure if they didn't, all the tourists would want to chip off a piece of it and take it home with them. When you see that big menorah, it's built on that kind of a model, on that kind of an idea. So, and I'm sure the Temple Institute has done research, and they will continue to do research, and they'll tell us what they have found. But this is what we have. These are the relics of history.
I think that a talent of gold, as best we can tell, is like 66 to 80 pounds.
Yeah.
So gold being as dense as it is, it seems like it might have been like a tabletop sort of thing, right? Like, is it really expected to be as tall as like a man?
Not necessarily. It depends on how thick the base is and how thick stuff. So here's a part of it that we need to know. According to some sources, it was hollow on the inside. So that would make it bigger.
They didn't have the ability to extrude, so they would have had to like melt and lay
Exactly. So that now we're talking about a different technology. But according to some sources, now you could beat them out into, you could take a piece of gold and beat it out into sheets, essentially, and then fold them and continue to do it that way. So who knows what it looks like. So if you guys want to keep walking down the pages of history, I have a couple more slides for you that I wanted to share. Because as I study, and you realize my specialty is Second Temple era. My specialty is that time. That's what I know more about than anything else historically. And I find it fascinating that there's so much information that is buried in those documents out there that people don't always know about. But as I read the documents, there's a little bit of a disagreement in what these menorahs look like. There's a little bit of room for that interpretation just continues to exist. So here's an interesting interpretation that I have for you. Everyone knows what this is?
Yes.
Familiar item, right? For those of you who are teachers, obviously familiar items. What solar system, right? So this is our representation. What if I told you that in the first century of the Common Era, there were quite a few Jews who actually connected the menorah to the representation of the solar system. You see, all you need is just the other side, right? You've got the half of it already, right? So if the model actually starts working, rotating the way it should be, you kind of sort of have that representation. And we realize that some of those lights are not so visible in the sky with the naked eye, right? And some are. And so when we come to ancient times of people staring at the stars in the sky, what they could see is what they could see until people started working into telescopes and things like that, right? So without magnification, that's what we had.
Well, in ancient times, most people thought that the system of the universe was geocentric.
Right.
So perhaps there were some who had that wisdom to know that it was
So
heliocentric.
most people thought that everything rotated around the Earth, right? And that model, of course, does not work for that. But guess what? Not everyone. So Philo of Alexandria is the first Jewish scholar who is credited with describing the branches of a menorah in terms of a celestial model, with God's light being at the center. Think about that. So this is what he wrote. This is Philo, called The Life of Moses. He writes, and this is an English translation, an older English translation, so ignore the inaccuracies. He says the candlestick, there would not have been a candlestick. He, Moses, placed at the south of the tabernacle, figuring thereby the movements of the luminaries above. So according to Philo, that was to figure the movements of the luminaries above. Luminaries is an old-fashioned word for those lights in the sky. For the sun and the moon and others run their courses in the south, far away from the north. And therefore, 6 branches, 3 on each side, issue from the central candlestick, bringing up the numbers to 7. And in all of these are set 7 lamps and candle bearers, symbols of what the men of science call planets. For the sun, like the candlestick, has the 4th place in the middle of the 6 and gives light to the 3 above, the 3 below it, so turning to harmony is an instrument of music truly divine. So you got it. You understand where I'm going with this. This is Philo. This is 1st century Jew. Okay? And he's talking about celestial bodies, and he's explaining the menorah is really to represent like a model of the heavenly sphere, with the sun being where? In the center. So just like that model that I showed you a little while before, I mean, he's pretty scientifically accurate there, right? Not the Earth is at the center of everything, but the sun is at the center. And other planets are around. Amazing, right? Mm-hmm. And then where were all these other people who would have said, you know, yes, you're right. No, that took many, many, many ages for people to figure out later on. This is 1st century. In Alexandria, Egypt, a Greek-speaking Jew is explaining in his own scientific terms, with limited scientific knowledge that they had, with the instruments that they had, that somehow the sky and the luminaries and the menorah are actually connected. And you know what? He's actually not alone. There were other Jews who also thought that way. Another very prolific writer to whom I turn quite often in my lectures is Josephus. And Josephus, in multiple places in his works, also talks about the menorah and actually the whole temple being a representation of God's heavenly abode. And that means stars and luminaries and angels and all these things. And so a temple is like a reimagination of that sphere that we call the sky or the heavens, right? Of course, we don't fully understand it, and there's lots of things we can't see. But as Josephus explained it, that's what the model is upon which the temple was built in Jerusalem. At least that's how he explained it, and that's how he understood it. There's a lot of very interesting things that he wrote, but in Antiquities, I'll read a little piece for you. So this is Josephus, Antiquities 3. He writes, facing the table, near the south wall, stood a candelabrum of cast gold, hollow, and of the weight of 100 minae. This weight the Hebrews calls kinakris, a word which translated into Greek denotes a talent. So there you go. So he's very specific and scientific there about the weight. But he says it was hollow. It was made up of globules and lilies. So flowers we're talking about. along with pomegranates. So there you go. You remember seeing that menorah that looked like a pomegranate menorah in the Samaritan synagogue? So we got pomegranates and little bowls, numbering 70 in all. Of these, it was composed from a single base right up to the top, having been made to consist as of many portions as assigned to the planets with the sun. So what he's saying is that the components of menorah actually correspond to the number of planets with the sun. Well, isn't it the same thing that Philo said? Pretty much. And Josephus lived just a little bit after Philo. So he continues. It terminated in 7 kephalas, branches. Literally, kephale means head. So regularly deposited in a row. Each branch or each head, if you think of it like that's in that sense, bore one lamp, recalling the number of planets. 7 lamps faced southwest, and a candelabrum being placed crosswise. So there you go. He's telling you the positioning. Even the positioning of the candelabrum to him was reflecting an actual heavenly design, right? How things lined up. And so according to him, those branches also represent the planets. Now, you have to realize that Jews throughout history have been captivated by the image of menorah, and many of them have come up with ideas of what they mean. We have ideas of what they mean. We have things that we like to say about the menorah. You know, we like to talk about divine light and things like that, and God's presence, and we have our own ways in which we like to describe it. This was their way. This was their way. They looked at the sky, and they saw the beauty of God, and they saw menorah being connected to those planets, because the king of the world who made those planets is the one who was reigning, and that temple was there to serve him and to worship him. So they inevitably saw the connections that they saw. So Jews from every generation have wondered about the lamp that represented the divine light, and we are in good company. We're still wondering today. We're still asking, what did it really look like? Menorah and light itself always captivated our imagination, because we are God's children of light, which meant to reflect Hashem's radiance. That's what we're meant to do. We are meant to be the menorahs walking around all the time, carrying that God's light. So that's why I think we're so enthralled with this idea, and that's why our imagination is captured. Whether you're Philo living in Alexandria, Egypt, or Josephus secluded in Rome, or a bunch of Maccabees out there in Judean hills, you are drawn inextricably to God's light, and the menorah is the symbol of that presence, which is why it was so important, which is why it had to be rededicated, which is why the miracle occurred with the menorah. Just think, miracles in the time of Hanukkah could have occurred with other items as well. Didn't have to be menorah. Could have been the altar, could have been other things, but it was the menorah with which the miracle happened. And so that's perhaps the reason why. So that's what I've got for you today. Something fun, okay? Questions, thoughts, ideas, reflections? Anybody? Time for Kiddush? Go ahead.
I was thinking if it's cast, could be 3D and not so two-dimensional.
Right.
And then there was also the comment that the base was crosswise.
Right.
So
this is what we're talking about, the base possibly being made of legs. You know, legs being like going in those directions. So again, we have one menorah with this big, huge, solid base that's like a stand, like a podium almost on it. And we have other depictions of menorahs that have legs.
Down in the tunnels below the old city, right under the western wall, they found near the burnt house as well, in the excavated down in Jerusalem. There are stones in these houses where the priests lived, and there's one they found in the last 10 or 15 years, really. And it was the first time that they really found one that had the three-pronged base. And they're like, oh, maybe
Yeah, we have mosaics, we have stone etchings from later periods of time. Synagogue art, essentially. Yeah, we have those things, but it's rare to find very, very early things like that. It's hard to find that. So, yeah, Danny, you had to stop there in the back.
I was just gonna say, it's interesting that Philo and Josephus, interpret it that way.
Yeah.
The tabernacle itself had luminaries in the drapery above.
Right.
And so it kind of makes sense, Moses saw what he saw on the mount, and he was bringing it down, and you have a luminary example, in the tabernacle itself. It's an interesting.
There's one thing, when you're in the desert, there's this beautiful TV in the desert. It's called the sky. It is absolutely breathtaking because there's no light for miles and miles and miles and miles away, and you could see every little glimmer in the sky, and it's amazing. And when you go up the mountain, you're getting even closer to those things. And so there's a reason why, like I said, they had their own entertainment, but it was the sky.
So when I was a kid, on that thought right there, we were traveling to the Grand Canyon, and if you looked on a map in the mid-'80s, where the least amount of population of the United States would be at one time, well, we went there. And it was in the middle of nowhere in Arizona, New Mexico, one of those two, I can't remember. Anyhow, we pulled off the road and turned off the lights of the van that we were in, and there was no moon and mountains all around us.
Yeah.
And it was so bright. If there were a rattlesnake on the ground, you could see it. Shadow, you would cast a shadow just from stars. No moon, no additional light. You could walk around. I mean, it was amazing. It felt like the stars were falling.
So that's what I imagine the world in a day before electricity. Okay? And that's what we're talking about. So there's a reason why the ancients were inspired by the skies, by the stars. That's why to them they actually declared the glory of God in a very literal way. I mean, a lot of times I know we just don't do that. We don't look at the sky. We have more exciting things to, busy ourselves with. We got phones and stuff. Yeah, we got iPhones, but that's the truth. I mean, it's this Josephus, Philo. That's how they saw it. They saw the temple very much connected to this heavenly abode, and then that's what they wrote about. That's how they imagined it. Anyway, that was the interpretation of their day, and I thought to share that with you. So, by the way, I just have to give credit. I ran across an article that a lot of this that I picked up is by Professor Stephen Fine, who did a great job explaining that. But, okay, fantastic. All right, so now you know more about menorah than you could possibly have known before you walked into this room. Okay.